listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees and where you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. Coronavirus raging, Donald Trump raving mad, Boris Johnson missing, Joe Biden whimpering against the dying of the light. What could possibly go wrong? Well, just about everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, particularly in the axis across the Atlantic. Donald Trump and Boris Johnson in charge, or are they, and for how much longer? Certainly here in London, Mr. Johnson has lost the confidence of Mr. Rupert Murdoch. And as anyone in politics in Australia, in Britain, maybe even in America can tell you, that is a dangerous place to be. We'll be talking to people all around the world this evening because this is the radio show with pictures. It's the place to be. Even now, you can encourage your friends, family, followers, contacts to tune in now. Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a very bumpy ride here on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We're also on FM in the United States of America. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. And on AM, coast to coast, across the United States. But this is a radio show with pictures, and hundreds of thousands of you, 500,000 of you, were watching as well as listening. Who knows how many are merely listening? 500,000 of you are watching. And here's how you can do that. You can watch on my Facebook page, George Galloway Official, or on my YouTube page, ditto, George Galloway Official. Now, if you're on my YouTube channel, click subscribe and wait. In order to find out when we're live, change your notification priority in the top right to all. Only then will you be notified of new videos and live streams. But if you don't want to go on my Facebook and my YouTube, well, you can do the same thing on RT's Facebook pages and RT's YouTube pages. You can also watch on Twitter and even a new innovation on Instagram, as more and more people extraordinarily are. Now, where to begin? Let's begin in the United States. I've followed Donald Trump's tweets for a long time, and they are frequently unhinged, green ink, capital letter. But this week, when he called for people to liberate one city after another, one state after another, in his own country, of which he's the president, I thought that it was quite likely that I'd hear the flap of white coats as they came to take him away. I sense from watching his daily press conferences that he is rapidly losing touch with reality. You may say he's never been there, but I always thought there was method in his madness. And I think I was right about that. I don't resile from that. But when you are encouraging armed people onto the streets of your own country, I think that country is in very serious trouble indeed. And I think the United States is in very serious trouble indeed. It is now, within a week, it will have a larger percentage of people unemployed than it had at the height of the Great Depression in the 1930s. There is going to be a terrible economic hurricane in the United States in the run-up to the presidential election. In ordinary circumstances, that would mean that Donald Trump was for the high jump. That would mean he actually needn't even bother turning up in November for the presidential election. The economy ruined, unbelievable levels of sickness and death in the communities across the United States. And I mean communities. These are not just numbers. These are cities. These are blocks. Brooklyn, thousands of people afflicted. The Navajo people, the indigenous American people of the Navajo, have actually become close to fearing that they will be wiped out by the coronavirus, those of them that weren't wiped out when the white settlers came and stole their land and killed them in the first place. The Navajo are amongst the most afflicted people on the entire earth. But Donald Trump, throwing accusations around like Billy O, doesn't seem fazed. Why? Well, one reason has to be that the mental decline, I used to call it cognitive decline, but I was just being polite. The mental degeneration, rapid mental decline of the Democratic Party's candidate, Joe Biden, must be of grave concern to anyone in his family, in his party, in his country. This man simply will not be able to stand a general election campaign against a ruffian like Donald Trump. Donald Trump will not be polite. He will not even play with Joe Biden as the cat plays with the mouse as a prelude to killing it. Donald Trump will tear Joe Biden apart. And therefore, we have the likelihood, in my opinion, I haven't seen the bookmakers' odds lately, but the likelihood of a man who has lost almost all connection to reality, with his finger on the nuclear button in the United States for another 4.5 years. That is truly terrifying to me, and I think it ought to be to you. Let's talk about China. The United States government has decided that as a prophylactic to its own staggering levels of inaction, ineptitude, its staggering levels of incompetence, has decided to go all out to blame China, even though their own chief medical officer continues to contradict the president when he, in an increasingly bizarre way, accuses China of having let this whole monster loose from a laboratory in Wuhan. Now, I said right at the beginning of this crisis that the coronavirus could have escaped from a germ warfare lab. It could have escaped from the Chinese germ warfare lab in Wuhan. It could have escaped from Fort Detrick in the United States germ warfare lab. It could have been taken by the United States military, based right next to the Fort Detrick germ warfare laboratory, to Wuhan last December for the military games which took place there. It could be either of those things. But all of the science accumulated to date makes clear that actually the coronavirus is a naturally occurring virus, a mutation of a naturally occurred virus that has already visited us in times gone by, a mutation that makes it still more deadly than it has ever been. The French government today denounced Donald Trump's warmongering by saying there was no evidence whatsoever that this virus came from the germ warfare laboratory in Wuhan. If anyone's got any evidence to the contrary, let them produce it. But of course, they haven't, they won't, they can't, because so far, at least, it doesn't exist. It's simply this. Don't look at us in all our staggering negligence and incompetence. Look over there. Look at China. And of course, where Washington goes, the United Kingdom follows. This week, the British government announced a deep dive, that was a new one on me, a deep dive inquiry into Britain's relations with China, and it will never, they said, be business as usual again. Well, personally, I hope the Chinese heard that loud and clear. I hope they concluded that these people are not your friends. These people are not even reliable business partners. And according to the right-wing press this weekend, the former decision to continue with Huawei in the 5G rollout is going to be visited again and terminated. Look, I hold no candle for China. I fly no flags for them. I hardly know a single Chinese person. I haven't been in China for decades. I'm not here speaking for China. But it seems to me obvious that one of the countries that has handled this outbreak of a naturally occurring virus best is China. China and New Zealand and South Korea and even Ireland have handled this virus almost infinitely better than the United States and Great Britain have handled it. And therefore I conclude that the British and American governments, in order to try and divert attention from their own failures, their own criminal negligence, a point to which I shall return, are seeking to get up and running a scare campaign, a hate campaign against China. And I hope that China draws the lesson from this. As a matter of fact, be careful what you wish for, because if the Chinese withdrew their investments from the United States and Britain, if the Chinese sold the treasury bonds that they hold for the United States, if the Chinese dumped the dollar, well, we'd all go under pretty damn quick. So be careful what you wish for. That's all I'm saying. But today's Sunday Times and today's Sky News reportage of this crisis makes another thing abundantly clear, and that is that Boris Johnson has lost the confidence of Rupert Murdoch, and that is a dangerous place for any politician to be. There's all-out war now against Boris Johnson by his erstwhile closest allies, and it's not hard to see that the man that Rupert has anointed to take Boris Johnson's place is little Michael Gove, who is, well, how shall I put it, pretty close. His lips sucking on the posterior of Rupert Murdoch, and for a very long time. How do I know this? I follow the public prints and the pronouncements of politicians and senior media people very closely. When I hear Robert Peston of ITV claim that he's gobsmacked to find how incompetent Boris Johnson has turned out to be, I say, well, he's the very man that you did so much to put into office. And if you're gobsmacked now, it's because you've been encouraged to be gobsmacked for an ulterior purpose, an ulterior motive. When I see the journalists who did so much to elect Boris Johnson's government now turning on him with venom, he's missed, skipped is the word they use, not missed. He didn't miss 5 Cobra meetings. That's the underground Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. Sounds more impressive if you say Cobra. The Cobra meetings, where the British state's inner sanctum meets to handle emergencies, were not missed by Boris Johnson, but skipped by Boris Johnson 5 times. It's abundantly clear from the reportage, particularly in the Sunday Times today, that the government knew that 500,000 people in Britain were likely to die from the coronavirus and did absolutely nothing about it. They did nothing about buying the personal protection equipment, our frontline services, and then our secondary services, like bus drivers and tube staffs and so on, would have the necessary PPE. They did nothing to secure the number of ventilators that we would need. They did nothing for months, it's now clear, to prepare a response to an emergency which they themselves had concluded during a drill for this in 2016 would quickly overwhelm the National Health Service. Operation Cygnus, 2016, October, war-gamed an invasion by a flu-like virus coming from East Asia. And they concluded that they could not publish the results of the war game because it was, and I quote, truly terrifying. Some people said it was a threat to, quote, national security to release the results of that Operation Cygnus. So they knew from 2016, when incidentally Jeremy Hunt, who is now scuttling around the TV studios, obliquely blaming his successors for their failures, Jeremy Hunt was the health secretary at the time. But never mind Cygnus. We knew from January that this was coming our way, and our government not only did nothing to save us, they deliberately did nothing. Because it's now as plain as a pikestaff. Their policy was herd immunity. Their purpose was for us all to get it and let the devil take the weak and the old, many of whom had voted for Boris Johnson just last December to put him in power in the first place. It's quite clear that the death toll in Britain is going to be the highest in all of Europe. It might even be the case that the British death toll is second highest in the whole world, with the United States as the highest. Now, if that fills you with confidence in the 2 blonde bombshells in power in Washington and London, well, good luck to you in Ward 5 in Broadmoor. But for the rest of us, we have to conclude that our governments, our states, our societies are not fit for the purpose of defending our people against our real enemies, are not fit for the purpose of providing work and food and shelter for our own people. We are led by dangerous fools, dangerous knaves. That's really the question you have to work out. Now, we've got a poll running. Will Boris Johnson survive the coronavirus? By which I don't mean he'll have a relapse amidst his 1,500 acres in Chequers where he's recuperating. No. I mean, will the Conservative MPs be rid of Boris Johnson before this coronavirus is over? Answer A, yes. B, no. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, it's a close-run thing, but the United States is definitely in the deepest trouble over the coronavirus, not just because it has vastly the largest number of cases, by a very considerable distance, the worst rate of death from the coronavirus, but its political structures are not just creaking at the seams, they are actually falling apart. Governors are attacking the president. The president is attacking the governors. The president is tweeting the armed people should advance upon, the one I saw was Virginia, but there have apparently been many others. Liberate Virginia, he said, encouraging the gun owners of America to head into the streets. In Michigan, I saw thousands of people demanding that the lockdown be lifted. The lockdown on the placards being equal to communism. That's how deep the sickness runs in the United States of America. So we've got Donald Trump raving mad at the podium in the White House, and Joe Biden simpering in what seems to be semi-imbecilic terms, I don't know, in some Darby and Joan home somewhere. I've no idea where he is. What I do know is he's not all there wherever he is. Rania Khalik is, though, the wonderful journalist, presenter, and writer, and she joins me by Skype right now from the United States. Rania, welcome back to the show. Now, I really don't mean to be kind. My great-grandmother was an American. I've got American blood in my veins. But your country is in one hell of a mess. When the president is encouraging armed insurrection on the streets of his own country and raving almost unprecedentedly at the dispatch box or at the podium in the press room every single day, I fear for the future of your country. Do you?
Yeah, George, it's surreal what's taking place right now. In some ways, it's not surprising because everything in America is so politicized, and we have elections in November. So everything the president says and does right now is about trying to win that election. The election has already started. And in the process, what he's doing is insane. You have a bunch of dark money Republican groups combined with a mix of right-wing militias that are holding these anti-lockdown protests, like you mentioned, comparing lockdowns to communism. And it's being encouraged by the president, and it's extremely dangerous. You have hundreds of people crowding together in the midst of a pandemic where you have a highly infectious respiratory virus that's killing people, that spreads from person to person. And as you can see, we have the highest infection rate in the U.S. We have our hospitals right now are completely overwhelmed. We don't have enough protective equipment for our healthcare workers. It's a complete disaster, and these people are going to infect each other. They're going to go and infect other people, and they're going to help overwhelm our hospitals even more. And that is at the encouragement of the country's president, who is now redirecting all of the outrage against himself for being so woefully unprepared for this pandemic by, invoking this foreign boogeyman of China. And both parties are playing into it now. It's a complete disaster. While at the same time, unemployment in America is soaring. We have 22 million people that we know of unemployed in the last 4 weeks. And the government is doing very, very little to help actual Americans. And so at this point, I don't want to be alarmist, but I do fear in certain parts of the country, you're going to see a real societal breakdown. And these protests with people waving their guns and just saying the most idiotic things and likely infecting each other is kind of just the beginning of it.
Well, I think you expressed all that perfectly, and we're going to seal that in a tube and send it out to the world. But let's break down the different parts of this. The governor of Florida reopened Florida's beaches, and of course, predictably, thousands of people headed for the beaches, inches, feet at most, apart. The protest in Michigan, these are armed people. I mean, this is not the Congo we're talking about here. This is the United States of America, supposedly the leader of the free world. This is the richest and most powerful country on the earth, containing the power to annihilate the earth in its nuclear arsenal. And we've got a man who's standing there daily with millions of people watching him, encouraging the most incredibly irresponsible behavior. How are the Democrats responding to this?
It's really shocking because, right now is an opportunity politically for Democrats to come in and say, you know what? Here's what we need to deal with this crisis. And instead, they're kind of just useless. I mean, you do have real pain. These, as silly and idiotic and dangerous as these anti-lockdown protests are, they are tapping into a rage that's only going to grow in America because, like I mentioned, 22 million people unemployed. Every other wealthy country in the world is doing something to prevent complete and total economic collapse and the failure of all their businesses by taking over the payroll responsibilities so people aren't unemployed and can still afford groceries, by giving people checks every month. What is the U.S. doing? It's giving people $1,200 checks over the course of 4 months. Many people haven't even been able to access that money. It hasn't frozen rents or mortgages. It's pitiful. The richest country in the world isn't taking care of its own people. So you're going to see a lot of rage and legitimate grievances by people who do need to put a roof over their head and feed their families. And so that's why I say it's an opportunity for Democrats to come in and say, you know what? This is a time when we need universal health care. This is a time when we should be taking over the payroll like we see in a lot of European countries of small businesses and keeping them afloat and keeping money in people's pockets. And instead, what we see from Democrats is really pathetic ideas like they want to subsidize private health insurance for people right now. That's a Democratic idea. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. And it's not going to, speak to the grievances that people have. And what that means is that they're ceding the ground to the right to come in with all these insane conspiracy theories. And say, you know what, go protest the lockdown. That's the issue. The issue is the lockdown, not the fact that your government and the elites in this country aren't taking care of you and are giving corporate bailouts to all these massive companies that don't even pay taxes. I mean, it's just utterly shocking. And what you do have too is, a couple, like last week, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in Congress, did like a little funny interview where she was sitting in front of her refrigerators, her two massive refrigerators.
Gigantic, they were the biggest freezers I've ever seen.
Luxury refrigerators, bragging about all the chocolate she has in her freezer. I mean, this is a 100-millionaire leader of the Democratic Party, and this is all she has to offer.
It was a Marie Antoinette moment, wasn't it?
It really was. And I think at the end of the day, this is going to be really devastating politically for the Democrats. And I think you're going to see Republicans win out as a result. Like, I think we're looking at a situation where we're likely going to have a second term of Donald Trump. And that's a disaster. But who can you blame? Who can the Democrats blame? They had an opportunity and they're squandering it by giving us Joe Biden, a corporate hack who can't even form a coherent sentence, who's completely uninspiring, as the option against Donald Trump. I mean, we're just, in this country, we're headed for disaster. It's a scary moment.
Yeah, of course, your societal breakdown and the mass poverty and unemployment of your own people, disastrous, tragic, though that is a matter for you. What is more worrying for the world is that whereas before the Democrats hated Russia and the Republicans hated China, now both of them hate China. And war with China is not actually an impossibility now. You may say I'm being alarmist, but it seems to me the logical conclusion, ineluctable, I see Bannon shouting for it on the TV today, is a drive to isolate and sanction and quarantine China in a way that may very well lead to actual war, which means world war. Are people really serious about this, Rania?
I don't know if they're so much serious about world war, but they're certainly serious about coming up with justifications for more bloated military budgets. And of course, whenever you escalate, we were already on a path to a new Cold War with China. That was happening before coronavirus. Coronavirus, of course, has accelerated that, because what you have is this rising this rising new power, China, that really does pose a threat to U.S. Dominance over the whole globe as it's had for the last 20 or so years. And so that, scares American elites. So we've already been on that path. But right now, I think what you're seeing is an attempt by Donald Trump to redirect all of the outrage at him for really, botching the response to coronavirus at China. And it's working. If you look at the polls of most Americans in both parties, they blame China. They're angry at China. They're basically primed to support any sort of war, whether it's a proxy war or a real war against China. And then what you have in the Democrats is, rather than saying, okay, let's be the adults in the room, this is insane, you have them trying to out-hawk Trump on China, as we've seen in the last couple of days with Joe Biden unveiling his campaign strategy of saying, Donald Trump is too pro-China and he let the Chinese have too much influence. And so it's very dangerous, of course, like you mentioned, for the world, and internally in the U.S. It's, at the end of the day, this is a completely racist narrative that's actually impacting Asian Americans across the U.S. We've seen hate crimes against Asian Americans go up. And for any of us who remember the feelings after 9/11 and in the lead up to the Iraq War and in the years after, the whole war on terror, you feel something really familiar here. It's like the war on terror has shifted to war on China. All the talking points have shifted to China as a part of the axis of evil, and the big evil Chinese yellow peril menace is like the new big bad Muslims. And so if you see that the kind of toll that's had on the world the last 20 years, you can imagine how much more devastating it will be to have this accelerated escalation between the U.S. and China going forward.
Yeah, because China will fight back, of course. I made the point earlier, right. Be careful what you wish for. If China decided to drop the dollar, move to the euro, or abandon reserve currencies altogether, if China decided to dump the U.S. debt that it owns, the treasury bonds and so on, your 22 million unemployed would pale into insignificance to the economic crash that you would have then. And if they did so, the danger of a hot war would, of course, exponentially increase.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's a good point to make, because in the past, I mean, with the targets of American imperialism being countries like Afghanistan or Iraq, these were very weak countries that didn't have the resources or capabilities to fight back. China's not a weak country. It's a growing power that has a very powerful economy and that's able to really handle its own. So the U.S. isn't picking a fight with someone who can't fight back. They're picking a fight with a powerful country, which makes it all the more dangerous. But I think also what you're going to see with all this is everything you just mentioned. The U.S., in a way, the U.S. is so dependent on China economically that there's only so much the U.S. can do without severe consequences. So I think, what you're also going to see is, because of the coronavirus and this accelerating Cold War, and we've already seen it partly with the trade war, is you're going to see it really not only impact the American economy, but impact the standard of living in America. I think that this has really accelerated what was already taking place, which was the decline of U.S. empire. And you're seeing that play out internally as well. So it's like, in this case, a war with China isn't going to be America coming out on top and just crushing its enemy. But how that plays out in the rest of the world, too, it could lead to a lot of proxy wars as well. We don't know. But it's definitely a dangerous escalation. The rhetoric in America is extremely dangerous, and no one's speaking out against it.
And just to, if you want to measure the decline, when I first became politically conscious, it was in a general election between President Jack Kennedy and also President Richard Nixon. And now the dichotomy is Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Just think about that. All of us need to just think about that. Rania Khalik, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Fantastic picture that Rania painted there. Now, Dakota says, time for the headmaster at the Moats University, the only bloke who's got the most formidable knowledge that I know. Parliament needs to have him back now more than ever. Thank you, Dakota. Samson says, China is to blame for allowing those wet markets to carry on, knowing the risks after SARS and H1N1. If they can lock down a city, they can lock down those markets. They're farmers' markets, Samson, right? The kind of things that Guardian readers just love when they visit other countries or even the countryside in our own. Peter says, good evening, George. Thanks for keeping the show going through this bizarre time. Is a highlight of the week, and the Sunday airtime slot, in my opinion, gives the show more gravitas than the Friday slot. Thank you. Carlos says, thinking of everyone affected by this terrible virus, sending out caring thoughts to you all. And on Facebook, Dave says, our hospitals here in the UK are so empty that the NHS staff are always outside dancing. That'll be Dave, was it, that hung up and ran away last week on the show. Julie says, what do you think about building sites in London being open for business tomorrow, with Unite the Union calling for staggered start and finishing times? I've often wondered how completing a new high-rise building in the centre of London was in any way essential work. And Will, as a Canadian, I'm scared to death of another 4 years of Trump. David, I'm ready to listen to someone with honesty, compassion, and common sense. Good evening, GG. Thanks, Dave. Barb says, we're surrounded by crazies in the United States. Kevin says, we don't need a vaccine. The virus has to make its way through. 80% will have little or no sickness. Hard luck if you're in the 20%, Kev. And the emails are coming in too. If you were put in charge of Captain Tom Moore's £26 million raised for the NHS, how would you spend it? A good question. I'll ruminate on that and come back to it. And here's another one. I wanted to get your take on the fact Sir Keir has been pushing Her Majesty's government for an exit strategy. Would you agree or disagree? It's actually saving people's lives right now in hospital wards, on buses, on tubes, that I'm more worried about than an exit strategy. But then I'm one of these weirdos that thinks human life is more important than pound, shillings, and pence. Now, earlier in the week, my good wife, all on our own, in our garden, shot our weekly short for RT. It's going great guns. It may actually be one of the biggest of all the shorts that we have done in terms of audience. Take a look at it. The leaked Labour report is devastating confirmation of a 4.5-year conspiracy against Jeremy Corbyn. Though you won't know about it unless you watch and read RT and follow social media. All those political journalists and broadcasters who throughout the entire period of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership crawled incessantly through the entrails of internal Labour politics have completely ignored a report which seems to establish the biggest scandal in the Labour Party's more than 100-year history. The report reveals that at the most senior levels in the Labour Party's headquarters, a conspiracy was afoot right from day one. A conspiracy to undermine Corbyn's leadership and ultimately to throw the general election of 2017, when Corbyn came less than 3,000 votes away from forming Britain's first ever socialist government. It's alleged in the report that they diverted funds to their favoured right-wing Blairite candidates and choked funds and activity in the constituencies of Corbyn supporting candidates. It is full of racist, juvenile, misogynistic abuse of Corbyn and his supporters. It talks about how it would be to watch Jeremy Corbyn set on fire. It talks about people being taken up against a wall and shot. Yet none of the British media find any of this remotely interesting enough, even for a footnote. Imagine if this was a Corbyn headquarters talking in such a way about their internal party rivals. Most importantly of all, it seems to indicate, as many of us argued throughout, that the vile poison of anti-Semitism was deliberately weaponized, inflated, enlarged, exaggerated, and sat on in order to provide the maximum conditions to damage their own leader. And of course, worse than that, to damage the whole concept of anti-Semitism itself. Anti-Semitism is the most vile form of racism because in the lifetime of some people still around today, it caused the mass murder and extermination of 6 million Jews in Europe. And it would have continued, except that the Red Army liberated the camps. Those implicated are of the highest level in Labour politics. Some of them continue to hold extremely high, strategically important positions in British politics. Some of them sit in ermine in the House of Lords, nominated, ironically, by Jeremy Corbyn himself. I want to put it this way. The idea that the Corbyn conspiracy was merely the product of very rotting apples in a barrel in the Labour Party headquarters is profoundly wrong. These people didn't just hate Corbyn and what he stood for. These people stood for something else. They were not followers of Jeremy Corbyn, but they were followers of someone else, of something else. They were working for someone, for something. If you want to know who I think that something, that someone really was, ask yourself this: who benefits from the destruction of a potential Labour government which would now be 3 years in power? Think how different life would have been for tens of millions of people in Britain if Corbyn had got that extra 2,700 votes in 2017. Who benefits? The same people who've always benefited from right-wing, pro-NATO, pro-American politics inside the Labour movement. They hated Corbyn not because he wanted to put tuppence on the income tax. They hated Corbyn because he just might follow a different foreign policy to that which Labour has always followed before. Tony Blair is the architect of the great Labour scandal, and it's Tony Blair and his friends who are now in charge of the Labour Party. After all, who is Sir Keir Starmer except Tony Blair without the laughs?
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Now, the polls running fast. Will Boris Johnson survive as Prime Minister after the coronavirus? A, yes, 56%. B, no, 44%. Quite close. Vote now on my Twitter feed. 706 votes so far. Salah from Birmingham is on line one. Better take him. Salah, go ahead.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thanks for calling. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say, you claim to be a supporter of Palestine, the Palestinian cause, and you support the Hamas government. You backed them in the past. And yet, a few weeks ago, one of your colleagues came on the phone and complained about the way that China are treating Uyghur Muslims. And there is no doubt, there is a lot of evidence online, on various media outlets, both left-wing and right-wing, and yet you denied it. So aren't you a left-wing supporter as opposed to a supporter of justice?
First of all, I'm absolutely guilty of being left-wing. And secondly, I don't claim to be a supporter of the Palestinian people. I am, as a cursory glance at my life's work would make clear. And your phrasing it in that way is deeply offensive and insulting to me. Thirdly, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a supporter of Hamas. Not now, not then, not in the future. I have never supported Hamas. So now that we've got the furniture that you deliberately placed around the issue out of the way, let's deal with the issue. The phantom of Chinese persecution of millions of Muslims in the Xinjiang region of China is just that. It's a phantom. It is got up by the same people who told you that the Falun Gong, religious fanatic organization, is somehow representative of the Chinese people. The same people that claim that the Dalai Lama should be ruling the Chinese region of Tibet. The same people who are now telling you that the Chinese deliberately engineered the coronavirus and sent it our way, having lost a comparatively few of their own number. And they rely on fools like you, Salah. They rely on you like Pavlov's dogs. And they won't come to you with the story of the Falun Gong because your name is Salah from Birmingham. They go somewhere else with the Falun Gong story. They won't come to you looking for support for the Dalai Lama because your name is Salah in Birmingham. They come to you with the Uyghur phantom story precisely because they know that you are fertile ground for that conspiracy theory. Now, lastly, again, you lied your way onto this show by claiming that you wanted to speak about 5G being rolled out in the United Kingdom. So you're the second person in 2 weeks to lie about what they actually wanted to speak about on the show. So let me hear what you've got to say and then be gone. Go ahead. Last word to you, Salah.
Yes, I think you are I really feel you are a left-wing sympathizer. This is not about
Hold on. You really think that I'm a left-wing sympathizer? Wow.
I don't think I'm not.
Wow, you are Einstein. You are the smartest man on the globe. You really think that I am a left-wing sympathizer?
Absolutely, John.
Is the Pope a Catholic? Do bears defecate in the woods? What made you ever think that I was not a left-wing sympathizer? Have you been away for a long stretch, like the last 40 years?
Can I speak now?
Yes.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm not denying the fact that you are a left-wing sympathizer. What I'm saying is all impartiality is thrown out of the window when you speak, when you talk about the Palestinians, or it's a double standard, basically.
But you liked what I said about...
With regards to China, China have lied about everything.
Yeah. So,
China have lied about the numbers this week, that they've actually increased their numbers. And no country in the world believes
we've all increased our
China
numbers, Salah. We've all increased our numbers. China have increased their numbers by a lot fewer than we have. Because because we've just discovered that we weren't counting the human beings dying in care homes. So our numbers have increased also, 50% perhaps, greater than the hospital rate of death. But I want to ask you something. Was I telling the truth about the Palestinians or not?
Your emphasis on the Palestinians is dependent on the fact that they have a left-wing government. Otherwise, you would never support them. Look at the fact that what you've done with China and the Europe.
Salah, are Hamas a left-wing government?
They've got left-wing tendencies, yes.
You're some joker, you. The Islamic resistance in Palestine has left-wing tendencies.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Salah, I can't continue. You're actually bonkers. Let me hear from Eric in Vancouver. Go ahead, Eric.
Hello, George. How are you doing?
I'm good. My blood's pumping harder now than it was 5 minutes ago. Go ahead.
That was quite something to hear. It's
Yeah.
so great to hear you on the air broadcasting your proper English, which is a pleasure to the ear, let me tell you.
Thank you so much.
Well, George, I think we are dealing with a serious malnutrition born of incomplete information that is served to us daily as if it were a full meal, and by an incompetent and non-inquiring media. Now, specifically, I would say there is almost like a de facto D-notice operated in the United States regarding the COVID virus when no one in the mainstream or even alternative media very much will interview true objective experts on bioweapons that are not already connected to that industry. I mean, most of the people that are up there, according to Dr. Boyle, who I'll get to in a moment, are already deep involved with that.
We've spoken before, Eric. You're one of those who suspects that this coronavirus is a bioweapon, yeah?
Yes, I do, because there's a lot of evidence to that effect. But you have to be perhaps a scientist to really understand it. That happens to be my background. What
do you make of the French government's statement on this today?
You know, I didn't hear that. Could you tell me?
The French say there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever, their words, that the coronavirus originated in the bioweapons lab in Wuhan.
Well, that reminds me of your great hero, Coburn. What was his first name? Claude Coburn. The journalist who said, don't believe anything until officially denied by the government.
Nothing is true until it's officially denied. Well, let's work with your hypothesis.
All right.
So presumably you imagine then that this was a bioweapon which was accidentally released. Am I right?
I think that's quite possible, yes. I don't think it was purposely released personally. I don't think there's any evidence to that effect. But I think that the big takeaway, I hope, from this call is that you should get Dr. Francis Boyle and interview him. I mean, this is a guy who's been there. He's the author, as you know, of Public Law 101-298 in the United States, the biological
he's an admirable
weapons anti-terrorism.
He's an admirable man. We'll definitely try and do that, Chris, if you're listening, as you must. Let's try and get Dr. Francis Boyle. I know him. I've met him. He's a splendid
that will be
man.
an interview.
What do you think? I said from the beginning, in fact, I made a whole program about it on Kalimahorra on Al Mayadeen television, that of course the coronavirus could be man-made. It could be man-made and released by accident. It could be man-made and released deliberately. It could be man-made in China or in the United States. What's your current thinking?
The evidence has outlined in at least 3 different articles, but in particular the one in Nature magazine that we've talked about before. It's December 2015. The title of the article for your listeners to look up is SARS-like cluster of circulating bat coronavirus pose threat for human emergence. And one of the authors of that article, which the research they're talking about is at the University of North Carolina, was a Dr. Zhenli Shen. He is the director of the Wuhan BSL Level 4 laboratory, which had 4 documented previous leaks of lethal pathogens, including an earlier SARS episode. So this is the kind of information you're going to get if you talk to Dr. Boyle.
No,
he knows all these people.
Sure. But I already knew that. I also know that the Fort Detrick American bioweapons laboratory had so many accidents that they closed it down.
That's right. It looks that way from what happened last summer, yes. There was a lot of illness in the area of the lab before the shutdown happened.
And the military athletes that went to Wuhan for the military games late last year came from the Fort Detrick area.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Interesting to say the least. Thanks, Eric. Thank you. We'll try and get Francis Boyle on. I promise you that. Thanks very much again for the call. Let's squeeze in Joshua in London before the break. Go ahead, Joshua.
You all right, George?
Yes, by the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what are your sort of thoughts on how the Scottish government has handled all this? Any particular thought?
Well, they've handled it just about as badly as the UK government has handled it. Small businesses are crying out for the financial assistance for which the Scottish government were given the money by London. And the main takeaway I have from the Scottish government so-called response to this whole thing is that they are trying to use it to further divide the peoples of this small island by falsely alleging that somehow England is being prioritised over Scotland in the allocation of money, resources, medical equipment, and so on. So have you got a better take on that?
Well, in my opinion, like, they would seem to be doing a slightly better job, but then you got issues like population density, which is very much faster in Scotland than in most of England and Wales.
Well, so it could scarcely be more sparse. We have 5 million people in a country as big as England, and England has 55 million in the same space.
Yeah, so I think they get a bit of a head start on that, but they've had to fire their chief medical officer for failing to follow her own advice, so that isn't praiseworthy. And they've
although they tried, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, tried very hard to hold on to her chief medical officer, even though that CMO had been captured twice, disobeying the very things that she was demanding the public in Scotland shouldn't do, namely travelling hundreds of miles to her holiday home at weekends.
Yeah.
Mind you, so did Prince Charles and Camilla. They also broke the rules.
Yeah, no, I mean, if Russia has a death toll 2.5 times smaller than Scotland's, even though it has a population 30 times larger nearly, then while I think they've handled it a bit better than Boris Johnson, the Scottish government, they're not deserving of any real praise anymore.
The phrase "doing a little bit better than Boris Johnson" will soon come historically to be the very definition of faint praise. Thanks, Joshua, for that call. I'm going to go to Jamie Lowe, who did a great job last week with the news. I'll be right back after this bulletin.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Some of the biggest names in music have joined forces to celebrate healthcare workers in a globally televised concert. Lady Gaga, Paul McCartney and Billie Eilish were among more than 100 artists who performed songs from their living rooms due to the coronavirus lockdown. The Rolling Stones even managed to play together from 4 separate locations. Spanish children who have been kept at home since the 14th of March under strict measures to curb the spread of COVID-19 will at last be able to see the outside world later this week. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez aims to relax the lockdown rules on April the 27th so that they can get some fresh air, as he put it. Spain has seen more than 20,000 deaths since the start of the pandemic and almost 200,000 reported cases. In a televised briefing, Sanchez said Spain had left behind the most extreme moments and contained the brutal onslaught of the pandemic. The number of COVID-19 patients who've died in UK hospitals has risen to 16,060. That's an increase of 596 in 24 hours, down from the previous daily death toll of 888. However, these figures do not include those who've died in care homes or in the community and are likely to be at least 50% higher. Professor Sarah Gilbert, who's leading a team developing a vaccine at Oxford University, said that they are hoping to start clinical trials towards the end of next week, but nobody could be sure it was possible to find a workable vaccine. She said that they would need government support to accelerate manufacturing because the UK currently does not have the facilities to make the vaccine on a large scale. Germany's health minister says that the month-long lockdown has brought his country's coronavirus break under control. Jens Spahn said since April the 12th, the number of recovered patients had been consistently higher than the number of new infections. The infection rate has dropped to 0.7. That is, each infected person passed the virus to fewer than one other. In Germany, 3,868 have died of COVID-19, fewer than in Italy, Spain, France and the UK. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has signed an order allowing online marriages, as many weddings have been cancelled under lockdown restrictions. From now on, people in the US state will be able to apply for marriage licenses remotely, and clerks allowed to conduct ceremonies virtually. Cuomo joked that the decision meant that there was no excuse for couples to not tie the knot. The decision comes after New York State extended lockdown measures until May 15th. More than 13,000 people have died of coronavirus in New York City alone. Israel is facing the growing prospect of an unprecedented fourth election in just over a year after a deadline to form a government has expired. Its president passed the mandate to parliament after the centre-left bloc leader Benny Gantz failed to seal talks to form a unity government in time. If no one else gets nominated within 21 days, new elections will be held by August the 4th. And finally, Captain Tom Moore, the 99-year-old who's raised more than $25 million for the National Health Service in the UK by walking around his garden, has released a charity single, which has gone to #1 in the iTunes chart. The track You'll Never Walk Alone, which Tom Moore recorded with Michael Ball, has pushed Dame Vera Lynn and Catherine Jenkins' duet of We'll Meet Again to #2. The 1945 Rodgers and Hammerstein song from the musical Carousel will raise money for the NHS alongside Captain Moore's ongoing walking appeal. It's become an anthem for medical staff during the coronavirus pandemic. The new version features an introduction from Tom Moore, who says, "When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark." Moore may be 99, but the woman he beat to #1, Dame Vera, is still alive at 103 years old. The Forces sweetheart Dame Vera had entered the charts just a few days before with the re-release of her wartime inspirational song, which first came out in 1939. That's Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Will Boris Johnson survive as Prime Minister after the coronavirus? A, yes, 60%, up 4. B, no, 40%, down 4. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. 1,118 votes so far. You've got till 9 o'clock to have your say on that on my Twitter feed. Now, Italy, of course, has suffered extraordinary agony in the time of the corona. The death toll in Italy remains the highest in Europe, though it is rapidly being overtaken by our own here in Britain. It's often said that Italy is 2 weeks ahead of Britain on the curve. One man who's been writing about the situation there is Nicholas Farrell. He's a journalist and an author based in Italy, and he's been good enough to join us by Skype this evening. Nicholas, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, give us an update, will you, on what the current situation in the country is.
Well, what is it? 120,000 people infected and, 16,000 dead, I think.
And
so it's, we're a bit ahead of the British.
Well, only a very bit, Nicholas.
Not quite much.
In fact,
the key question.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, given the Italians are too civilized to put their old mother in a care home, most old people in Italy are living with their families. We, on the other hand, have massive numbers of people in care homes, and we've now discovered, belatedly, that they are riven with the coronavirus. So, actually, if you add the British hospital dead to the care home dead and the at-home dead, we're already ahead of Italy, surely.
Well, yes, if those figures are true. I mean, what is it, 7,000 in the care homes and 15,000 in the hospitals? That makes, 22,000 dead in England. But I mean, the other question here, of course, is how come nobody in Germany is dying? And also, why, what are the, well, I don't know, I can't remember what I was going to say. But anyway, I mean, how do we know how many people have got the damn virus? That's the trouble.
Well,
I reckon I've had it, for example.
Really?
Yeah, I reckon I had it in January.
Well, the answer to your question about Germany is surely this, that the German health service is better than the Italian and better than the British. That the Germans... No, go on.
But I think that I'm not so sure about that, really. I think what they did, yeah, maybe you're right, but I think what they did, which nobody else really did, was they did lots and lots of testing right from the start, so they could then find out who had the virus and were able to isolate them.
Yeah, but that's what that's what
be really slack on testing.
That's what the WHO told everyone to do in January. Testing, testing. The leader of the WHO said, but the rest of us didn't do it. The Germans did it. New Zealand has done it with such spectacular effect that I think that no one has died in New Zealand. They locked down immediately. They tested a staggering number, something like 1,500 people per million. They did a staggering number of tests. Then they isolated the people that were positive and tracked their contacts. And thus, by some miracle, they've been spared. Why didn't our governments do that?
Well, yeah, well, that's a very good question. But I mean, partly because they just do not have the ability to do that. They do not have the tests for a start, but not just that. They don't have the laboratories available to process all that huge number of tests. That's the problem. It's a logistical thing too, in terms of the lack of laboratories. Not just lack of tests, but lack of laboratories. I mean, you know, and only a country like Germany had the ability to do that because it's health system regional.
Germany or South Korea or New Zealand. It's come to something, Nicholas, hasn't it? When Britain and Italy, respectively the 6th and 7th richest economy in the world, is unable to do such a basic thing when a much predicted, often heralded pandemic virus heads their way.
Yeah, I know. Well, okay, but I mean, I don't think anyone's come out of this smelling of roses, have they? No single country really. Well, you would argue the Far East countries have.
No,
I mean, yes,
I'm arguing unarguably that New Zealand has the best record in the entire world.
Okay, well, you know about New Zealand, I don't, but I mean, I'll take your word for it. I mean, but the thing is, I mean, everybody's talked about that this was going to happen sooner or later, no? Such a pandemic as this. And yet, of course, nobody really prepared for it, except, I mean, okay, New Zealand is a smaller country, isn't it? So, I mean, the other thing is that, well, I don't know quite, I mean, sorry, I'm not aware of the New Zealand example. You've obviously heard it and I haven't. But, I mean, I know about the Far East, but there, you see, you're talking about a different approach to the freedom of the individual, for example.
Let's go to that. The implication of what you're saying is that places like Singapore, South Korea, China did what they did because of the political systems that they have. Though I think South Korea's political system's pretty similar to Italy's and Britain's, is it not?
Well, depends how you define these things. I mean, a lot of people are having a go at Orban's Hungary now because the virus has given him an excuse to become a dictator. But the fact is that in Italy, the government is ruling by decree, not by parliamentary vote, and nobody raises an eyebrow. So, you know, there's a lot of bullshit talked about who is a dictator and who isn't. But I suspect that in the Far East, there is a different attitude to the individual and liberty compared to the West, especially the British Anglo-Saxon West, the British and American Anglo-Saxon West. And, for example, I think they think the rights of the community are stronger than the rights of the individual. And so, therefore, it's far easier to introduce such lockdowns, you know, really stringently. and mass test people quickly and all that stuff. And then if they're, and lock them away if they're positive.
Well, I think that's an important philosophical question that you have raised. I don't think I don't think the evidence fits your dichotomy. I think your dichotomy is a somewhat false one, and I gave two of the reasons why. New Zealand and South Korea are not remotely communist or socialist or collectivist societies. But let me ask you, Nicholas, how has it impacted the political scene in Italy? You make the point the government is ruling by decree. No one's raising an eyebrow. That's happened in Italy before, of course. But the point is, are they doing a good job or not? Is the government being strengthened by the job that it's doing or weakened?
Well, it's very difficult to say, but the polls, such as they are, reveal that the premier, who of course is not even an MP or anything, an elected MP, is brought in as a compromise candidate in 2018. He is extremely popular. But on the other hand, I mean, how are they handling it? Well, not very well, I would say. I mean, you talk about the intervention of the state to help the citizen being vital in these situations. I mean, I certainly think that is the case, should be the case. That it's only the state that can save the country. And, in England, massive amounts of money are being sloshed about, offered here, there, and everywhere. In Italy, it's all just peanuts, basically. I mean, I'm a father of 6. I've got 6 children, age 16 down to 4, all, of course, cooped up at home right now. My wife is Italian. She doesn't work. I work as a freelance. So luckily, I suppose I work from home. And luckily, we live in the countryside. So we've got fields that we can walk around and get out and about and see the fallow deer and the marsh harriers and all the rest of it, and the beautiful wildlife. But we're on the coast, on the Adriatic coast. But we're not getting any money. Hello, are you there?
I'm there. I'm fascinated by your description of the Adriatic coast. Finally, just move your hand away from the camera for a minute, Nicholas, because we've lost you. My last question would be this. The British media is being slaughtered by the likes of Andrew Neil, by the likes of Piers Morgan, for the frankly supine way that it is approaching government spokesmen and even health and science spokesmen at these daily press conferences. Is the Italian media any more toothful than the English media?
Toothful?
Yes, I just made that word up.
It's a good word. It's a great word. Well done. Toothful in the sense aggressive, terrier-like. The Italian press is bloody useless, basically. Oh God, it's a complicated subject. But I mean, basically, they don't get to the point ever, like the British press gets to the point straight away.
I assure you that is not true. With the exception, honourable exceptions of Andrew Neil and Piers Morgan and nobody else. Nicholas, we lost your feed. It's been wonderful talking to you. I hope that your family of 6, I shall shortly have a family of 6 myself, survive and thrive on the Adriatic coast.
How many children do you have?
I have 5 and 1 on the way.
Oh, well done.
Yes,
well done.
Yes, we're both men after each other's hearts. Thank you very much indeed, Nicholas Farrell. Let's take a quick break, shall we?
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Now that was the week that was. Historically, it certainly was a momentous 7 days. On this day in 1770, what is now called the New World was discovered. It kind of had been discovered by the people living there already, but you know what I mean. On April 19th, in 1770, Captain James Cook spied Australia. The Aborigines, of course, had been there for thousands of years. Cook was only 41, a mere lieutenant, and had been promoted to that only because the British Admiralty wouldn't accept that the ship HMS Endeavour should be captained by Scottish geographer Alexander Dalrymple. It wasn't to end too well for the brave captain, who in 1778 became the first European to visit Hawaii. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1779, Captain Cook and his crew were greeted with rocks. Shots were fired. A chief was killed. And Cook was peremptorily murdered by a charging mob of locals. 5 years after Cook spotted Australia, the revolt against British rule in the United States erupted in the American Revolution, the real Americans having been largely purged beforehand. It began in Concord, New Hampshire, with what is known as the shot heard around the world. But the years to follow were to bring jazz, rock and roll, Presley and Dylan, and alarmingly Donald J. Trump. It was also on this day in 2011 that my friend Fidel Castro resigned as first secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba's Central Committee after 45 years. Also on this day in 1995, a bomb at a public building in Oklahoma killed 168 people, including 19 children, and injured more than 500 others. Timothy McVeigh, a 33-year-old Gulf War veteran, was convicted of the attack and sentenced to death by lethal injection after a 2-month trial. He was executed at Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana on the 11th of June, 2001. It's funny I don't hear too many people from the right in the United States remembering that anniversary. The Balfour Declaration was recognized on April 20th, 1920, when one country, Palestine, was given away by a second country to a third group of people who intended to create a third country. The ramifications continue to this day and will likely outlive us all. On the 21st of April, 1945, the Red Army captured the outlying suburbs of Berlin at the beginning of their taking of the city. Hitler and his mistress, Eva Braun, committed suicide in his bunker on April 30th, only hours after they were married. By May 2nd, the old German parliament building, the Reichstag, had fallen, and Marshal Zhukov claimed the honor of being the liberator of Berlin. On April 24th in 1916, the Easter Rising, about which we spoke last week, against British occupation began in Dublin with the taking of the O'Connell Street Post Office and the reading of the proclamation of Irish independence. The rebels were eventually overwhelmed and captured, and most of the leaders executed, including the wounded James Connolly. The struggle continued, including a brutal civil war, until the Irish Free State, minus the 6 northern counties, was created in 1922 and became what we know as Ireland today. That was the week that was, and what a week it was. Now, will Boris Johnson survive after the coronavirus? 1,837 votes so far. You've got half an hour left or so. Will Boris Johnson survive? A, yes, 60%. B, no, 40%. Still quite narrow, don't you think? Michael is in Minneapolis. Got to hear him. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, George. Good to be on as always.
Wonderful to hear your voice again. Go ahead.
All right, so I actually am seeing some serious correlations between UK politics and United States politics that week.
Yeah.
So
we're two people divided by a common language, Michael.
That's a great way to put it. So essentially, it came out this week that the Democrats were running a two-front offense. So on the one hand, they were pushing the state parties to hold the primaries. Joe Biden was pushing for it publicly. DNC Chair Tom Perez and Barack Obama were pushing for it privately. And now we've had poll workers die in Illinois and Florida, and we've seen an enormous spike in COVID cases in Wisconsin, which was the most recent state that they sort of bullied into having a primary, obviously with the Republicans right on board pushing for the same thing in ghoulish fashion. Even at the same time they did that, it came out that behind the scenes, Barack Obama was conspiring to mount a public attack against Bernie Sanders and somehow blame him for people voting in the primaries, despite the fact that Bernie was encouraging people to stay home, even as Biden and Tom Perez were demanding the state hold the primaries and go to the polls. And as you know, with the Corbyn, news, that bombshell news, it's also come out, over the last 8-9 months in little dribbles and leaks that the entire party apparatus, was working against Bernie Sanders right up until, Obama orchestrated a full-out coup right before Super Tuesday. So we're sort of in this position where we should have Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, and instead we have Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and I'm not sure either one of them is totally coherent. And I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts on all of this.
You're absolutely correct to identify the mirror image. In fact, it's been going a long time. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were a mirror image of each other. Bill Clinton and Tony Blair were a mirror image of each other. And Sir Keir Starmer is only a marginally less incoherent version of Joe Biden, and Boris Johnson only a slightly better educated version of Donald Trump. So you're right, and Oscar Wilde's observation that we are two people divided by a common language is coming true with increasing frequency. We're also the two countries that will end up worst affected by the coronavirus. We're the two countries that will likely lose the most people to the coronavirus, and probably we're the two countries whose performance against the coronavirus has been most pitiful. Maybe we should join up again, Michael. After all, what could possibly go wrong?
I'm up for anything at this point. There was no way for Bernie Sanders to lose this primary. And so now we as the whole progressive movement are, I work for a political PAC that serves under the Democrats. So now it's my actual job to try to elect Joe Biden. And if that's not the most depressing part of my year, I can't even tell you what is.
Well, I wouldn't do it. I'm afraid I could not in conscience ask people to vote for Joe Biden. I was hoping.
Well, I'm not going to vote for it myself, but I also need to make rent, and the United States refuses to provide UBI like every other legitimate country in the world.
I understand that dilemma, but I was hoping for a third-party run by Bernie Sanders, and if not by then by Tulsi Gabbard. But neither of them is interested in doing that. Who will be running?
They're not.
Who's the Green candidate? I supported their candidate last time, Dr. Jill Stein. Is she going to run again?
Yes. Yes, I voted for Dr. Stein as well last time. I actually voted for her in 2012 as well. Unfortunately, she's not running this time. And so it looks like it's not for sure yet. It looks like it's probably going to be Howie Hawkins. And Howie Hawkins is both a Russia conspiracist and has said some awful things about Julian Assange.
Oh, dear.
So there's really no good place for the progressives to go.
Oh, well, I don't have a vote, but if I did, I'd be staying at home. Thanks, Michael, in Minneapolis. Let's go to Eves in Idaho. Go ahead, Eves.
Thank you, George, for having me on. I wanted to tell you two facts I believe are hard facts and which are for me a bombshell in the story of coronavirus. The first one is, and I regard those facts as true. The first one is an assertion by an Israeli, I believe it's Channel 12 in Israel, saying that United States told Israel and NATO beginning of November, and this is crucial, about a virus having escaped from Wuhan. The second fact, which is a bigger bombshell and which I regard as true, is that Dr. Montagnier, Professor Montagnier, who is Nobel Prize in Medicine, discoverer of the HIV, said that this virus is made of a coronavirus which has been spliced, and by little pieces of HIV virus that can be only done by a very advanced laboratory, and it probably come from Wuhan. So people ask him why, who did it? He say, well, I don't know, but it probably happened in Wuhan. And the second thing is that they were probably working on a vaccine. So as hard as it is, I think it's a good story. I believe that Americans and Chinese, for reasons which are easy to understand, were working together on a vaccine against the AIDS virus. That's what Dr. Montagnier thinks they were doing. And things get wrong, and then they share the blame. But at the end of the day, you see, it's not a bioweapon, I believe. They were working on a vaccine together. And I wanted to tell that to you because that's now the story, I believe.
Well, I'm glad that you did. I already knew the story. I also think it is a highly credible story. It is certainly true that the United States gave millions of dollars to the Chinese laboratory in Wuhan under President Obama. They were joint sponsoring with the Chinese government work on a vaccine. I also have heard that the Nobel laureate said that the coronavirus has been spliced not just by HIV but also by TB. That there are three items present, if you like, in this tiny little virus: TB, HIV, and COVID-19. That therefore means it was either released accidentally or it was released deliberately by someone. But I'm going to press you on something, Eve. If the United States government, and the CIA has said so, if the United States government was aware of a release of this virus into the atmosphere in November, then that means they knew before the Chinese government knew. That means they knew before anyone else knew and were able to tell their friends like Israel, presumably Britain, the Five Eyes, that this was so. Now, how is it possible that the American government knew more about what was happening in Wuhan than the Chinese government did? I think that's a very moot point, a very interesting question. And secondly, of course, it makes our performance ever since all the more lamentable because it turns out we did nothing meaningful to defend our people, not from January to April, but from November to April. Do you see my point, Eve?
Yes, no, you're absolutely correct. I believe that American, because we don't know exactly, I believe that American and Chinese knew it together because they worked together. But what you say is absolutely correct. But the most important thing for the world is to tell the world that probably the Chinese or the Americans didn't conspire for bioweapon and World War III. They were working on a project which was good for humanity and went wrong. This is very, very different than what you hear everywhere. It is a positive thing. Now, the response of the administration has been terrible. It is fair to say that the Democrats didn't help him because, he was in the impeachment time and all that, so that didn't help. But the bottom line, so I believe that the Chinese and the Americans were working together on a vaccine.
Okay, Yves, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that. We'll have try and get Dr. Francis Boyle on next week, see his take on that. Thanks, Yves, for that. Peter, in London, he knows where the virus came from, so we better take him. Go ahead, Peter.
Evening, George.
Evening, sir.
Yeah, there's too much evidence now to point to. I think America are playing a very long game here. They're trying to take China down. And China were very foolish to have their military games in Wuhan, in the same city as the Level 4 lab. And, there's a connection to this Benassi family that just thickens and thickens. Today we find out that this Benassi woman who wrote a report for the Wellcome Trust on the 3rd of October. Oh, no, it was written before that, published on the 3rd of October last year. She is connected to a transport company that transports biological weapons. One of our members of her family transports biological weapons for the American Army. And another part of this family is the one that the Chinese are saying was in Wuhan in October. There's much more members of this family. Some of them work for Lockheed Martin. The one that was in Wuhan was driving for someone that now runs Lockheed Martin. There's lots of diplomatic immunity going on. They're connected to NATO. One of their relatives is a NAD rep. And the connection that I found today in Brazil is that she was working on cytokines in Sao Paulo. Cytokines is what, I don't know if your Ranjeet Brar fella has been speaking about it, but that's what's killing people. The Americans have played a very long, dirty game on the Chinese here, and it's about time that the peace-loving people of this world start getting their facts right, so that these idiots like Trump, and whoever else, the Mayo, Boris Johnson, whoever, are just the ignorant people that think that if China get took down, they're going to be slightly richer. We need to start talking about this. And, if we were fighting the Gulf War, the second one, this is 10 times bigger, George, and we really need to crack on with this because we're a long way behind the right-wing press.
Well, thank you, Peter. Send me any material you've got, please, through social media. I would appreciate it. Let me do some social media. Doug in Orlando says, Deep State knows time is on China's side. Rob Marin says the Democrats are a huge problem for the USA. They are weak and much like the UK Labour Party. Whatever happened to their leader, by the way, that Sir Keir Starmer? Is he isolating, bit off more than he can chew, or what? He's actually doing more supportive work for the British government's coronavirus response than Michael Gove, the Sunday Times, and Sky News. Funny old world, isn't it? Zaki Chowdhury says the US is literally occupying the entire world. People are still pretending that Trump is Hitler in the making. And Remembrance Rug Guy says, is social distancing an oxymoron? Antisocial seems like a more apt descriptor. And Neil Curry says, hearing an English or American going on about Chinese mistreatment of Muslims is beyond irony. Indeed, it is. The Reds are us. George supports all the oppressed. Thank you for that. And Derek says, the government ministers are acting little better than the generals in World War I. Very good comparison. Prepared to send the troops, i.e. the NHS staff, into an environment without proper protection, while simultaneously praising them. It's time the generals went into the hospitals. Let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, Governor Cuomo in New York, I heard on the news, has now made it possible for people to be married online. I suppose the opposite of that might also be possible. You might be able to get divorced online. Maybe you already can, I don't know. But one thing is for sure, it is testing, challenging for couples to be permanently locked down together. If they don't have children, they can have a whale of a time, I'm sure, and the maternity wards will be buzzing 9 months from all of this. But if, like me, you've got a lot of children in the house, then the mental health, well-being of children and parents is obviously a very challenging thing to maintain, especially those living in small, cooped-up accommodation, especially those who have no garden, especially those who are miles from the nearest open green space and parkland. So there'll be a boom, I'm sure, in family and couple psychotherapy. And we've been lucky enough to get Tanja Bozic, one of the best family and couple psychotherapists. She's at the private therapy clinic, and she's here to talk about how to cope with this lockdown. And I'm guessing that quite a few of the viewers and listeners, even if they're pretending otherwise, will now be craning that little bit further forward towards the screen or the radio to hear what Tanja has to say. Tanja, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. It is a testing time, this, isn't it?
Yes, it is, George. Thanks, first of all, for lovely words. It is testing time, I'm afraid, and I assume that throughout the coronavirus and afterwards, we will have academic studies to show as well what we did in corona times.
Yes, I mean, as I say, if you're on your own, it's going to be very lonely. If it's you and your partner, you're quite likely to be having a whale of a time. But if it's you and your partner with whom you're no longer having a whale of a time, and even more if you've got a lot of kids in the house, and in the circumstances I described, it can be hell.
Well done, George. Well, don't become family therapist. You're very experienced in this, I presume. Let me tell you, I'm similar to you. I'm 48 as well. Now, this regardless of me being family therapist, I will quickly just go through a few points what we can do, regardless of whether we're single, whether we're a married couple or couple with children. First of all, just few pointers, George. One thing is being kind to yourself. So go to bed on time, sleep ideally 7 to 8 hours a day. Just try to go to bed before midnight. Eat healthily, so try to have 3 to 5 healthy meals a day. Supplement your, daily food intake with some vitamins or minerals. Hydrate your body. So this is, George, what we can do on an individual level. even regardless of corona, we would still implement these measures. Now, when it comes to exercising, some people, as you announced, are lucky to have park nearby, or some people are lucky to have treadmills or bikes at home. For those who don't have them, ideally they can join some online group where they can do yoga, exercise, this, that, and the other. So these are, George, CBT or cognitive behavioral measures that should be in place to help us get through. Now, let me just pinpoint quickly that there are 4 basic emotions, which are fear, anger, happiness, and sadness. So what do we do in corona times? The prime emotion is fear. If I live on my own, most probably that I will fear many things that in normal circumstances I don't fear. So for single people, it's different than to partners. Partnership, as you said nicely, with or without children can be a tricky one. Why? We have facts and figures that domestic violence and abuse, the figures for these things have increased last couple of weeks. Why? When you're in confined space where you can't go to work, you can't really exhibit things that you're used to doing, there is bigger chance that you might have it does have twofold effect on us. Firstly, we understand, oh, this partner of mine or this husband is brilliant. Maybe I didn't notice that before because I was busy going to work doing different things. So that's the positive thing. And I'm noticing that you, same as PTC Clinic, as our CEO, Dr. Becky Spellman, we are positive and we say, yeah, in corona times, there might be positive things. However, George, on the negative side, many couples that did have relationship that wasn't the best, and they were triangulating or avoiding issues by putting them under the carpet, like going to work, doing different activities. These things are now going to escalate. And that is the reason why we have more cases of family abuse, family violence, and this is very difficult. Now, if we have children, I have them too, and I did like your introduction. Like in my personal circumstance, I'm happy because, you know, when you have teenagers or older children, they don't tend to sit at home. So again, on the positive side, family dynamics might be nice because we get to see more of our children, we get to socialize more. However, with families with small children, you know, toddlers or babies, it can be more stress. So if you ask me what are the numbers, we still don't know. But for some families, it's going to be better. For some families, it's going to be worse. So it's very, very important to follow on these family dynamics.
So what do you think is going to be busier a year from now? The maternity wards or the divorce courts?
Well, I'm very optimistic personally. I would love to see more maternity wards. However, there are some figures, like in China, for example, that the number of divorce cases are increasing. So if you ask me personally, I would like the positive end of the spectrum, like my colleagues from PTC. We are positive. We think along these lines. But I'm afraid, George, the future is not that beautiful because many people will lose jobs. Many people have already lost jobs. So the daily functioning is now being jeopardized. So if you ask me, we will see the figures released, obviously, after COVID is finished. But I'm sad to say that there might be more divorce cases.
Yeah, and suffering. I mean, we were talking about the US earlier. 22 million people are now unemployed in the United States. Getting on for, within a week it will be, greater than the percentage of unemployment in the Great Depression in the 1930s. It's quite likely, because when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches cold, as they say, that the mass unemployment will return, not just in this country, but to other European countries and other countries across the world. And it's hard to be happy and well adjusted when you've lost your job and you're poor, isn't it, Tanja?
It's very difficult, George. I am proud to be British, but I originally come from Serbia. So I've been through it 20 years ago when we had the war. So you're talking to someone who's been for 5 months in a nuclear shelter. So I may be the right person to speak to, because it is going to be difficult. Now, normally us British didn't have major depressions, and we somehow coped. But I very much fear that even in this climate of today, it's going to be difficult, because many jobs are being tested, George, and we are now getting to see whether people can work online. Many will lose jobs. What an impact on mental health will that have? What I like about Corona and basic emotional fear is that it knows no boundaries. So whether you're black or white, religious, non-religious, Labour Party, whatever party, never mind. So emotions-wise, we're the same, but economy-wise, we're not. What we expect psychotherapists that we will be dealing with, George, is the increased amount of people having these existential issues of being able to pay for mortgage, pay for food, and therefore we expect the bigger amount of people suffering anxiety features, depressive features, because fear on its own is just a basic emotion that is with us, and we should embrace it. However, it can go up, so we get more anxious, we get panic attacks. If fear goes to that extent that it's overwhelming, we start getting phobias. So these things you're discussing are just real life issues. Many people will lose jobs, and therefore that might have an impact on their mental health overall.
How do you deal with your children's questions? It depends what age they are, of course, but for example, I have a 5-year-old son. My 3-year-old daughter's not yet asking these questions, but my 5-year-old asks me every day, because of course I have to tell him when we're out running, playing football for exercise, stay away from people, and I have to shout loudly if he's about to break those rules and so on. My 5-year-old is actually afraid of dying. He hasn't said it to me, but he has to his mother, that he doesn't want to die, he wants to live, and so on. How do you deal with what should you say to your children about the fear issue?
Well done, George. Good question. Now, let me tell you, family therapy and psychotherapy in general says communication should be direct and open. It's up to children to raise the issues. So if your child doesn't raise the issue, just gloss over it, polish over it, and don't bring it up. If, however, some children, so I can now assess that your child that asked that question means that your family is very open and very direct. So if your child did ask this question, we can only, using appropriate vocabulary for their age range, for example, yours is 5, mine are 14 and 19, so obviously I will adjust my vocabulary, but fear of death is a regular fear that does, live with us. However, George, we should really explain what we as mum and dad think about it and let them choose what their behavior is going to be. Why am I saying this? I'm 48. My mum and dad never feared death because they were medical workers. So people in my family, for example, I don't really fear illness or death because, all my life I'm living with it. So my attitude towards it is very open. Acknowledge it, but don't stress over it. Some families might fear that they will get ill, that they might die. So the best you can do, like any other topic, feel free to be open to express your personal belief, but let them choose what they're going to embrace. If it makes sense, if you understand.
It does, Tanja. And finally, we've taken the approach of the much ridiculed government of Malaysia, in that we are not going around in our pajamas and dressing gowns all day. We are, as far as possible, being as smart as possible. I'm even wearing my makeup and my lip knot. You know what I mean? We are trying to look our best and act as if this was a normal day when, of course, it really is very far from a normal day. Is that your advice also?
I must say yes, because, George, that is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That means if you're in difficulty, you're not going to deepen that fear or whatever you're feeling. You're going to refocus, reframe. You're going to think about something positive. So that is a CBT. When clients come, George, it's here and now, okay? So I'm stressed about my marriage. I think it's going down the drains. What am I going to do? I'm going to refocus, think about something positive. So I must say that it might sound ridiculous, but as psychologists, psychotherapists, we try to find positive even in negative times, if it makes sense. So no, I can't go to work. I'm working from home. But yes, I'm going to put makeup. Well, I'm now talking to you. I have my hair done and makeup. So, you know, I'm pretending like I'm at work. Is it helpful for me? Yes, it is. So my advice to people is try to see, regardless of coronavirus, any issue you look at, try to be more positive. Try always to look at your glass as being half full rather than half empty. If it makes sense. But then don't go as well to cuckoo land, because yes, there are facts and figures where we see that currently 16,000 people have died, that we do have 120,000 people being confirmed positive for corona. So, you know, just finding the right balance, George, in all of this. That's, you know.
As always, Tanja Bozic of the let me get your clinic correct. Private Therapy Clinic, PTC. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, the poll is closed. Will Boris Johnson survive? A, yes, 60%. B, no, 40%. 2,282 people voted. The second poll, on which you can now vote. Who do you think will win the 2020 US elections? A, Donald Trump. B, Joe Biden. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. My old friend Philza from Ireland says, I'm sure you're aware of how wonderfully the Irish government dealt with coronavirus when it hit the world. From your platform, I would take the opportunity to praise the Republic of Ireland. And Michael says, New Zealand is coming out of its summer. Cases will increase as the Northern Hemisphere decrease. It's pneumonic virus that likes the colder weather, as many viruses do. That's why we have epidemics of influenza in the winter. And Stuart, in response to the poll, sadly, George, I had to vote yes to this poll. Could you perhaps run a second poll asking, should Boris Johnson survive as PM after coronavirus, so that I can vote no? And Joseph, by email, says, I've been speaking to my niece tonight, who is a frontline nurse for the NHS. It's a disaster. No PPE, no support, no leadership from either highly paid managers or the government. And James says, COVID-19 is obviously all the news at this time. It would be good if everyone was to stop blaming one another, Trump especially, and just work on getting testing kits, PPE, etc. But then you see, James, it's much easier to try and divert blame and attention away from your own utter, miserable, negligent and criminal failure. And on Facebook, Kathy says, many of us have lived in virtual lockdown due to disability. Living in our world now, we were the hidden taboo families. We exist now. Powerful indeed. That last point. Now, Captain Tom Moore, who has walked with his Zimmer up and down his garden so many times, he's raised £26 million for what was originally called NHS Charities, is of course a hero who should be knighted forthwith. And I was, I think, the first person in public life to say so. Piers Morgan, who's got a much bigger ship than me, took that up, and he's done a wonderful job in promoting the need to honour this great British hero. Captain Tom Moore is 99 years old. May God preserve him, and I hope we get a full Royal Air Force fly past his house on his 100th birthday. He's raised more money as a single individual than I think any person in history. The question is, how did we get to the situation where our National Health Service required 99-year-old pensioners to walk up and down their garden and the great British public to empty their pockets and their pocketbooks to send to a charitable cause, when the National Health Service is supposed to be a vital national sinew of our country? Now, if it's for NHS charities, wonderful. There's lots of ways that money can be positively used, constructively used. But I'd hate to think that Captain Tom's efforts had merely gone in to filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it of National Health Service funding. We need to mend the bucket. We need to properly fund the NHS. We need to properly tax the richest people and corporations active and profiting here on our island. We need to look again at whether we should be spending hundreds of billions of pounds on Trident missiles and other weapons of war rather than on the basics of keeping our people safe, healthy, and alive. I salute you, Captain Tom Moore. I may have been the first in the land to do so. I think you're a national hero. But I think the people who so reduced us to requiring you to make such efforts to have a proper health service are not heroes, but villains. Here's the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Some of the biggest names in music have joined forces to celebrate healthcare workers in a globally televised concert. Lady Gaga, Paul McCartney and Billie Eilish were among more than 100 artists who performed songs from their living rooms due to the coronavirus lockdown. The Rolling Stones even managed to play together from 4 separate locations. Spanish children who have been kept at home since the 14th of March under strict measures to curb the spread of COVID-19 will at last be able to see the outside world later this week. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez aims to relax the lockdown rules on April the 27th so that they can get some fresh air, as he put it. Spain has seen more than 20,000 deaths since the start of the pandemic and almost 200,000 reported cases. In a televised briefing, Sanchez said Spain had left behind the most extreme moments and contained the brutal onslaught of the pandemic. The number of COVID-19 patients who've died in UK hospitals has risen to 16,060. That's an increase of 596 in 24 hours. down from the previous daily death toll of 888. However, these figures do not include those who've died in care homes or in the community and are likely to be at least 50% higher. Professor Sarah Gilbert, who's leading a team developing a vaccine at Oxford University, said that they are hoping to start clinical trials towards the end of next week, but nobody could be sure it was possible to find a workable vaccine. She said that they would need government support to accelerate manufacturing because the UK currently does not have the facilities to make the vaccine on a large scale. Germany's health minister says that the month-long lockdown has brought his country's coronavirus break under control. Jens Spahn said since April the 12th, the number of recovered patients had been consistently higher than the number of new infections. The infection rate has dropped to 0.7. That is, each infected person passed the virus to fewer than one other. In Germany, 3,868 have died of COVID-19, fewer than in Italy, Spain, France and the UK. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has signed an order allowing online marriages, as many weddings have been cancelled under lockdown restrictions. From now on, people in the US state will be able to apply for marriage licenses remotely, and clerks allowed to conduct ceremonies virtually. Cuomo joked that the decision meant that there was no excuse for couples to not tie the knot. The decision comes after New York State extended lockdown measures until May 15th. More than 13,000 people have died of coronavirus in New York City alone. Israel is facing the growing prospect of an unprecedented fourth election in just over a year after a deadline to form a government has expired. Its president passed the mandate to parliament after the centre-left bloc leader Benny Gantz failed to seal talks to form a unity government in time. If no one else gets nominated within 21 days, new elections will be held by August the 4th. And finally, Captain Tom Moore, the 99-year-old who's raised more than $25 million for the National Health Service in the UK by walking around his garden, has released a charity single, which has gone to #1 in the iTunes chart. The track You'll Never Walk Alone, which Tom Moore recorded with Michael Ball, has pushed Dame Vera Lynn and Catherine Jenkins' duet of We'll Meet Again to #2. The 1945 Rodgers and Hammerstein song from the musical Carousel will raise money for the NHS alongside Captain Moore's ongoing walking appeal. It's become an anthem for medical staff during the coronavirus pandemic. The new version features an introduction from Tom Moore, who says, "When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark." Moore may be 99, but the woman he beat to #1, Dame Vera, is still alive at 103 years old. The Forces sweetheart Dame Vera had entered the charts just a few days before with the re-release of her wartime inspirational song, which first came out in 1939. That's Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, Fra in Ireland says Romanian fruit pickers are flown into Britain and Ireland amid a worldwide pandemic, putting their lives at risk and their families at risk, so farmers and corporations can fill their boots with money. It's simply despicable. And Kitten says Boris will stay PM because even if there are a few million deaths in the UK, there are enough Tory voting nutters who vote them in no matter how many may die. And Kieran says Boris is making Theresa May look strong and stable. A Twitter user says herd immunity does work. It's great for those that survive, perhaps not so much for those that don't. And there will be a lot of those. And Jonan, on response to our poll, says we'll see if there's a financial collapse. If there is one, worse than the Great Depression, I doubt he'll survive. But then we'll probably get Gove. Well, we've got Moats Medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, a physician, a surgeon, and an all-round sage, not just on medical matters, but on Chinese matters. His wife is Chinese. He has a close association with China. And so I'm going to ask him, first up, Dr. Ranjeet, thank you for joining us. What do you make of what seems to be a fairly dramatic turn to blaming China? Is this pure diversion, or is there something in the charge that China is lying, that it lied in the beginning and that it's still lying now?
Thanks, George. Pleasure to be back with you on the show. I think this this turn is, if you like, turn back to the original narrative. We know when this virus first emerged that Trump, that Johnson, that the UK government and the US government in particular were very keen to throw accusations around China. Initially, labeling it a repressive society, a communist society, obviously, a society that didn't share information. In fact, their own medical schools, look at Harvard Medical School, look at the key medical schools in the United States. If you look at what their virology departments were saying, they were saying at that time that it was remarkable that within 2 weeks of encountering an unknown disease, the coronavirus infection, that they had recognized it as a new illness, a discrete illness, that they had taken samples, genetically analyzed it, and found its genetic code and shared that with the world. That's a remarkable achievement. And that was the assessment of US medical virologists and academics, which totally undermines the current narrative and the narrative that they had at that time. Now, initially, there was a blow-by-blow account in the media of the rising numbers of cases in China. But as China brought it under control, then instead of gloating over the extent of the disease in China, it became suspicion that we weren't seeing the real picture. It's quite clear that we are seeing the real picture, that China has got this disease under control because of the measures that it took. And the World Health Organization has been very clear. They sent a delegation along with Europeans and Americans to verify and assess the response to this coronavirus as early as late January and early February. And that report has been released together with all the recommendations, George, that we're still not taking. And to me, as this is unfolding, and we know in the UK now there have been 120,000 confirmed test positive cases, there'll be many more cases, 16,000 deaths. During the last week, many days, there were close to 1,000 deaths in hospitals alone, and probably as many as 2,000 if you add on to that deaths in care homes and deaths in the community. And we won't know those true figures for some time. So as this has unfolded, as day by day we've had promises of more ventilators, promises of more capacity, promises of sufficient PPE, and it hasn't happened, there's rising anger. And it's quite clear that China has scored some very positive points in terms of its PR, because not only has it contained the virus in its own country, issued very timely warnings, been very transparent about the number of cases, and collaborated with Johns Hopkins University, for example, to actually put forward that live case tracker so we all know how many cases there are all over the world. They've actually been at the forefront of delivering aid together with Cuba and other countries, aid of medical staff, aid of their expertise. They've published a summary of just how to cope with this virus and disseminated it. And it's our responsibility if we've not followed that, or more precisely, it's our government's responsibility. And I think there's a very wide campaign which is coordinated across the Western world, certainly between America and Britain. And Labour and Tory have both come out. Lord Adonis published a disgusting article when he said this was, he said the coronavirus was China's Chernobyl, and China should be held accountable. As if this natural phenomenon, there's no question it's a natural phenomenon, scientists are very clear on that. It's been published in Nature magazine. American scientists are very clear that this wasn't a bioengineered weapon. This is a naturally occurring mutation of a virus, which is anyway widespread circulation. What's disturbing about this virus is not its enormous death rate, though the case fatality rate is high, much higher than the normal flu. It's this level of infectiousness combined with a relatively high mortality rate, which means if it really does spread, as we're seeing, the fatalities can be frightening.
Now, are we headed into the herd immunity 2.0? Because the government started with the idea, it's quite clear now, not just from what they said in public, but what we now know they were saying in private, that their plan was that to let this run hot, to let it burn through the population on the principle that probably, by and large, only old people and already sick people would perish from it, and that the economy was the main thing. The pound, shillings and pence trumped the idea of your grandmother, your mother, your father dying prematurely. Are we back there again?
It certainly seems that way, George. And it seems that way, I think, because despite protestations to the contrary, as you say, we found out that really was the initial plan, both from Boris's own Good Morning interview, later protested that he had been interpreted correctly, but he quite clearly said that there were discussions within Cabinet and within Cobra to the extent that you should let this run through the community. And subsequently, we found out about his chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, who very explicitly said, protect the economy, let it herd immunity, and if a few pensioners die, so be it. Now, what really spurred the government to action wasn't so much the health situation as the collapse of the economy. Black Monday, Black Friday, another Black Monday. We've seen a third of the value of worldwide stocks wiped out within the space of a week, and ushering in a period when unemployment figures are so high, and they're very massaged and subject to misreporting, really, unemployment figures. So it's an area which to get a simple figure is hard. But many economists are predicting that we're going to be looking at 25% rate. If you look at the economically inactive population, it was already 25% of the working age population not working before this crisis hit. So it's very hard to work out exactly what it will be, but it will be very high. So protecting the economy didn't work. Then suddenly, apparently realizing how many deaths that they would be overseeing and directly responsible for, we went into a very extreme lockdown. But the things that are necessary to get us out of lockdown were precisely the things that we should have been doing to avoid a general lockdown, but to take focused, targeted measures. And they remain widespread testing. When currently, out of the 500,000 NHS staff, we think around 5%, 1 in 20 NHS staff have been tested. I personally have had symptoms, have had to self-isolate, and then come back to work without ever having a test. And I'm by no means alone in that situation. So, without widespread testing, we don't know where the disease is, we can't act appropriately. And how does one come out of lockdown then without triggering, again, another rise? And we're barely plateauing, but still with very, very many deaths. It's not even certain we've reached the worst point. And to come out of this, we need to go back to the straightforward health measures of testing, of isolation, of contact tracing, and protecting the population. It's clear that we haven't done that. And precisely when we're having promises that PPE will be delivered, but it's not delivered, then the hospital staff are vulnerable. Then infections can't be limited within our NHS, within our state of our hospitals, which, as we talked about before, are at huge overcapacity. In the late 80s, Britain had over 300,000 hospital beds. Today we have, going into the crisis, we had less than 140,000 beds. There's a drop of over half in 20, 30 years. And that wasn't just because of increase in technology, day surgery, all the rest. It was a deliberate policy to cut it. We have one of the lowest bed rates. So we have a low capacity rate. We have 6 ITU beds per 100,000 of the population. The way we've expanded those ventilators from the 4,000 we normally have up getting towards 10,000 is mainly by decommissioning everything that we do in theatres and using those theatre ventilators, which are not really designed for long-term ventilation of ITU patients, but we're using them. And very slowly we're having, in dribs and drabs, a few come here and there, allegedly some going to the Nightingale Hospital, but really the entire effort to deal with coronavirus has been marked by failure after failure, reassurance after reassurance, upon which very little has been delivered.
What do you make, finally, and I'm grateful for your time as always, what do you make of a country that claims it cannot count the number of our old people dying in care homes? There is this thing that was invented recently called the email. Why can't the Department of Health email every care home in the country and tell them they want an email every morning telling us how many people died of coronavirus in the care home last night. Why can't they do that? What kind of a country, what kind of a rich country cannot do that?
Well, I think it tells you a lot about the priorities of our government and of our economic system, and it is something which is revolting a lot of people who are witnessing it. Of course, they're not absolutely sure what people in care homes are dying of because there isn't widespread testing within those homes. There was much talk a couple of weeks back about the 3.5 million tests that would emerge and testing would become much more widespread. There was a lot of talk about getting testing up to 100,000 a day. You know, testing went along at about 2,000 or 3,000 a day for a long time. It seems that it's got over 10,000. But really, these are pitifully small numbers. At this rate of testing, it will take the best part, George, of 2 decades to test the whole country. It's quite clear that this can't continue if we are going to deal with this and come out of the lockdown. And one wonders what the strategy really is at base at this current moment.
They've clearly given up with the idea of question. I mean, either we're a third world country being run by nincompoops, or they have no intention of mass testing in the country.
It certainly seems that way to me, because the time to institute this, to avoid the damage, was as we were seeing in February, the very first cases come into the country, when it really would have been possible to prevent this from running rampant through the community. But the initial strategy, which they outlined, which is a laissez-faire strategy of really almost amounting to, you know, I hate to use the word, but a cull of our elderly and weak and vulnerable in society, because these people, you can't make money from them, George. And you know, the bourgeois, to quote Molière, is someone who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. And they don't value the lives of workers that they cannot exploit, that they cannot make money from. And you have to feel, in the last analysis, that this is what is underlying their strategy. And you know, when they can offer the working people nothing, they offer them hatred. So they offer them scapegoats. So they offer them racism. So they offer them the scapegoat of China. And it does seem that there's a very widespread effort now to spread anti-Chinese propaganda. You know, I've heard Michael Gove issue words. I've heard leaders of the Labour Party issue words. And all of this talk, MI6 have been wheeled out, the former leader of MI6, to talk about, you know, totally changing our attitude towards China. So rather than offer us medical care, we're being offered, you know, a direction for our anger, a deflection of our anger away from our economic system, away from the privatization of our NHS, which has left it unable to cope, and away from our current leadership, who are clearly, you know, failing in their duty to protect the British people.
Thank you very much, as always, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. A wonderful tour of the horizon. Let's go quickly to the phones. David is in Houston, in Texas, not Ayrshire, on Joe Biden. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, George, you know, sorry.
Go ahead.
George, how do you know Joe Biden is not an olive branch from the deep state? I got a bad reception here, George.
No, I'm hearing you. How do I know Biden is what?
Hello?
Yes, David, you're on the air. Repeat your question.
No, he's not How do you know Joe Biden is not an olive branch from the deep state?
I think
I got to call you back, George.
Yeah, call us back. Let's go to Sean in Stevenage. Sean, are you there?
I am, George.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
How you doing? I want to talk about this Labour report.
Yeah, okay. Be sure you don't break any laws when you're doing it.
I'm going to try my very best, because it's hard not to burst a blood vessel, let alone break any law.
Just don't mention any names.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I can't understand why these people in the governance and legal unit have been drummed out of the party. I can't understand why they're not really in the Tower of London. In fact, floating down the river would be my preferred solution for them, because there's clear prima facie evidence here. They've undermined the elected leader of the party and his policies. They've undermined the electoral wishes and the democratic wishes of everybody that voted him in, which was a massive number. They've basically subverted our democracy here.
Well,
They're mean. The
of
language
course.
they use, they call people that vote left-wing or support his policies trots. That's the language of the 1950s political establishment in this country. I thought we'd gone past that. There's people at the back of this.
We haven't gone past that. And, of course, trots was the kindest thing they said. But I've got a bigger question. I think a better one. Unless you're going to tell me that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell did not know that all of this was happening, I'm asking you why they didn't do anything about it.
Well, that's a very interesting point as well, because it's their governance and legal unit. So they must have known the processes that are being run. They must have known the characters in there. And you can see from the report, they've actually accepted all the charges against the likes of Livingston and Williamson at face value. They didn't challenge them. They just wanted to know they were being investigated.
Well, that's a bigger,
with the right results.
But that's a bigger scandal, isn't it, Sean?
Well,
I mean,
indeed,
you can have rotten apples in any organisation, and it's John Doe and Jane Doe and people we never heard of. Not much political consequence, but we're talking about your leaders here. If your leaders are so bereft of the wherewithal to be leaders, in a way, they brought it all on themselves, didn't they?
You have to wonder. You have to wonder, because it's clear from the report there was one person making half of all anti-Semitism complaints, and a third of all the cases came from that one individual. How's that work?
But you see, even I didn't know that one until I read the report. But the point is, Sean, why didn't Jeremy Corbyn go on the television 500 times and say, yes, there have been a lot of allegations, but one person made 50% of them?
Yeah.
Why didn't he say that?
I'd like to know who paid that one person as well.
Well, they probably didn't need to be paid. But why was that not the default answer to every question on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party?
Absolutely. If we could spot that, why couldn't he? You should have him on your show, George. Get him on to answer.
Thank you very much, Sean, in Stevenage. Let me go back to David in Houston, Texas. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, George, I got one for you.
Yeah, excellent. Go ahead, sir.
How do you know that Joe Biden isn't a olive branch of the deep state?
I think Joe Biden is a semi-imbecilic, senile man. There's no deep state I'm aware of that would be so bereft of hands that they'd have to be employing Joe Biden.
I'll tell you how we could find out.
Tell me.
We go on an apology tour from Syria, kind of go through Russia and help them rebuild. That's how we could find out who's going to go forward with.
It's too bad, David. It's too bad the line. We'll need to let you go. I'm sorry for that. Would, I'm sure, have been an interesting call. Max says, yes, Boris will survive. They need him to get Brexit done. This time next year he'll be gone. He was just a Brexit PM, no more, no less. And Glenn says the Labour Party has no one at all who could beat Boris in a general election. That's a fact, and they know it. That's undoubtedly a fact. My question was not hypothecated on Labour beating Boris Johnson, but on the Tories overthrowing him. Darren says he needs to go. His incompetence has caused far too many lives to be lost, and if he's allowed to continue, he'll cause many more deaths. Marcus says, doesn't matter what your political stance is, whether left or right, Tory or Labour, Boris Johnson's negligence is the biggest dereliction of a Prime Minister's duty of care in British history, and he has to go. Who do you think will win the 2020 US elections? Donald Trump, 80%. Joe Biden, 20%. Almost 1,000 votes in. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. When I come back from this very short break, it's the Hall of Fame and the Wall of Shame.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I'm going to induct into the Hall of Fame this evening one of the most iconic, extraordinary, controversial, intriguing, and I think significant figures of the United States in the 20th century. I refer to Malcolm X. Malcolm X's original name was Malcolm Little. He was born on May the 19th, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, something I never would have guessed. But he was assassinated on February 21, 1965, in New York City. When Malcolm was 6 years old, his father, the Reverend Earl Little, a Baptist minister and former supporter of the early black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey, died after being hit by a streetcar, thought by some to have been a murder by white people in the town. The surviving family was so poor that Malcolm's mother, Louise Little, resorted to cooking dandelions in the street to feed her children. After she was committed to an insane asylum in 1939, Malcolm and his siblings were sent to foster homes or to live with family members. Malcolm lived with his half-sister Ella in New York, and there he became involved in petty criminal activities in his teenage years. He was known as Detroit Red for the reddish tinge in his hair. He developed, though, into a street hustler, drug dealer, and leader of a gang of thieves in Roxbury and Harlem in New York City. While in prison for robbery from 1946 to 1952, he underwent a conversion that eventually led him to join the Nation of Islam, which combined elements of Islam, rather quixotic elements, with black nationalism. In order to educate himself, he spent many long hours reading books in the prison library, even memorizing a dictionary. He changed his name to Malcolm X. He founded the Nation of Islam's newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, which he printed in the basement of his home. The Nation leader, Elijah Muhammad, had a special affection for Malcolm X and named him second in rank. He preached on the streets of Harlem and spoke, incredibly, at major universities such as Harvard and the Oxford Union. His keen intellect, incisive wit, and radicalism made him a trenchant critic of American society. He also criticized the mainstream civil rights movement, challenging Martin Luther King's central notions of integration and nonviolence. In 1963, fissures opened up between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad over the political direction of the nation. Malcolm urged that the nation become more active in the widespread civil rights protests instead of just being a critic. Malcolm brought additional bad publicity to the nation when he declared publicly that President John F. Kennedy's assassination was an example of chickens coming home to roost. Malcolm X left the nation in March 1964, and during his pilgrimage to Mecca that same year, he experienced a second conversion and embraced mainstream Sunni Islam, adopting the Muslim name Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. Renouncing the separatist beliefs of the nation, he claimed then that the solution to racial problems in the United States lay in Orthodox Islam. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated whilst delivering a lecture at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were convicted of the murder. But in 1992, the filmmaker Spike Lee brought out the movie Malcolm X with Denzel Washington playing Malcolm and being nominated for an Oscar. The point about this, and we're going to interview on Malcolm X's birthday the author of a remarkable book, Black Thought, Black Thinking, a history of the Black Acting, a history of the political thought and its transition of Malcolm X, who started life as a criminal hustler, became a member of a black separatist, quixotic fringe element of the Muslim religion, changed to the mainstream of the Muslim religion, rejected separatism, and having earlier condemned Martin Luther King, in fact began to politically advocate exactly the same political line that at the last days of his life Martin Luther King was doing. In other words, both Dr. King and Malcolm X were calling for black people and Muslim people to join with white people and non-Muslim people in class action against the exploitation of all by the economic and political system that obtained in the United States. Malcolm X and Dr. King became, from, in King's case, purely civil rights activism. In Malcolm X's case, an obscure branch of civil rights activism. Both of them became opponents of the Vietnam War, opponents of the economic system of exploitation of all, and demanding the integration of all against those responsible for both of those crimes and many others, including the systematic discrimination against black people in the United States of America. And just at that point, when both of them reached that point in the transition of their thought and their activism, somebody somewhere decided they had to be terminated with extreme prejudice. It's my belief that if either, both of them, had stayed in the ghetto of their previous levels of activity and thought, they would not have necessarily been terminated. They would not have necessarily been murdered. But when they did put all the pieces together, join all the dots together, and see the picture that emerged, both of them were cruelly killed. And so it's with pride that I enter the name of Malcolm X into the Hall of Fame. The wall of shame, given the hour, I'll have to cut short. I'm entering onto the wall of shame the British fascist leader Oswald Mosley. Because of my new book, and I'm now writing the sequel to it, it's called Black Lake. My first book, called Queensway, deals a lot with Oswald Mosley. Because, of course, he was Hitler's Gauleiter here in Britain. He would have been the Prime Minister of a Nazi-occupied Great Britain. And he would have carried out exactly the fascistic bestiality that was visited upon the people of occupied Europe, because by then we would have been part of occupied Europe ourselves. Mosley had been a Conservative MP then a Labour MP, then an independent MP, then a new party MP, and ended in jail as the leader of the British Union of Fascists. A fifth column within our society, waiting to profit from the Hitlerite victory in which he fondly believed and worked so hard to achieve. Oswald Mosley continued his fascist activities long into the 1960s. But he was never the threat in the 50s and the 60s that he would have been in the 40s if Hitler had been able successfully to conquer us. He used anti-Semitism as a club to defeat democracy in Britain. He probably grew to be ashamed of the things that he said and did in the 1930s. Certainly his children did. As one of his sons put it, my father, Oswald Mosley, was with one hand dealing with the most grandiose ideas, but with the other hand he was setting the rat free from the sewer. Nobody could put it any more powerfully than that. The heirs and successors of Mosleyism, of fascism, are still out there, of course. Though mercifully in Britain, we have a smaller problem with fascists than virtually any other country in Europe. There is no fascist councillor in Britain, still less a fascist MP. Whilst in many countries there are fascists in the government, in the parliament, and in numbers in the municipality. But we can never let down our guard. Wherever fascism, like Mosley, rears its ugly head, we have to name it and shame it for what it is. The people of Britain, led by left-wing sympathizers, to return to an early phrase, broke the back of Mosleyism as early as 1936 in the Battle of Cable Street, when 100,000 people stood in that tiny street in what was my own parliamentary constituency of Bethnal Green and said, "They shall not pass." And they stopped Mosley, and they stopped the black shirts. God forbid that we should ever have to stop them again. I'm entering Sir Oswald Mosley, yes, he was indeed a sir, on to the wall of shame. Here's David in Halifax on the line. Let's take a call from him. David, welcome.
Hello, George.
Yes, David, you're welcome. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, I've been on the left for a long time and I admired yourself, and especially Malcolm X. Can't believe that you eulogised him just then while I'm just making the call. That's made my thank you. But looking at the left, you tried to set up an alternative party again to Labour, quite right too. But the history of them being is one of despair, whether it's Socialist Alliance, whether it's Respect Your Own, whether it's Tusk, just keep having left groups falling out and leaving them. And then they're all sneering and thinking Corbyn was going to do it all, and that's where everybody should be in the Labour Party. I wonder what they've got to say now. Starmer, so soon elected now to lead Labour, whether they're ashamed of themselves now for undermining the previous projects, and whether you think after all this, when things settle down, whether the left have learned any lessons from setting up independent parties, then splitting, and whether they will put their egos to one side and stick together and give to today's working class a party they need, well to the left of Labour.
Well, thank you, David. I take a self-denying ordinance on these matters on this platform. Not for any legal reasons. I'd be perfectly legally entitled, but out of courtesy to the platforms that we are performing on and the people in Sputnik and RT who are making this broadcast possible, out of respect to them, I don't proselytize for my own political party or goals here on this platform. However, I will tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, tomorrow night at 8 p.m., on my Facebook page, and for members of my political party by Zoom, by direct means through the Zoom process, I will be talking about the collapse of the Corbyn project. And I do think that everybody who's interested in left-wing politics should tune into that. Whether you support me, like me, whether you loved Corbyn or didn't, whether you're glad or sad that the project has collapsed, I think you should tune in at least tomorrow night at 8 o'clock on my Facebook page. George Galloway Official, and the subject of the talk will be the collapse of the Corbyn project. I know Corbyn better than the great majority of people. I've known him longer than almost anyone else. I understand his politics and why they failed, I think, better than anyone else. And I invite you to see if I'm right about that tomorrow night. David, thanks for the call. Craig is in Glasgow. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Craig.
Oh, good evening to you, George. I hope you're keeping safe in this uncertain time.
So far so good. Thank you, Craig.
I was sort of calling about 8 o'clock, well, just after that, you had a fellow from London who was on about the Scottish government's response to it.
Yes.
And I think, I would agree with your point that it's been equally as bad as the UK's response, but I think it's potentially been worse because, from our point of view, we've had a government who has spent years pointing the finger at everybody else but themselves for the reason that we find ourselves and facing the situations that we do. And with this, it was no different because we have to remember that, Sturgeon and the SNP can try and point fingers of blame, but actually, with the powers they already have, they could have decided to close Scotland down before the UK made their announcement. Certainly, Wales had closed down their schools before we had considered closing ours down. And it comes from, I think in Scotland we are not represented really by anybody properly because we have a party who's concerned by independence and independence alone. And I think this coronavirus situation, I honestly think part of the reason the response has been so weak is because they've got one eye on this and one eye on the fact that, of course, next year we've got a Scottish parliamentary election that they'll no doubt be beginning preparations for by the end of this year. So I think that's their bigger concern, which is frightening, frankly, for Scotland, to think that we're in that situation. And then you look at the shambles, frankly, that's happening down south as well. I believe we live in the age of incompetence right now as far as our politics is concerned, and this pandemic has displayed it in an unfortunately fatal way for many people, but in the worst possible way. But also, for me, it's not just the politicians. We don't have in this country, or certainly in Britain as a whole, any real mainstream media outlet that is truly unbiased, which means the information people get, I don't think, is accurate the vast majority of the time. For accurate information, you need to, I think, look at stations or programmes like yourself and other sort of fringe media, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see ourselves as fringe media, but I take your point, and I think I know what you meant by that. One of the reasons why we have an audience every week of between 500,000 and 1.1 million, the highest one that we have had, is precisely because the BBC and Sky and ITV are not to be trusted, and nobody does trust them. Sometimes people watch them. They can't have the mother of all talk shows every night. Sometimes they watch them and fall for it. But the critical mass is developing in this country, which says that our country is deeply dysfunctional, that it is run by people who are not fit to run it. And it is reported on. The people who are running it inadequately, incompetently, negligently, are not being reported on, held to account by, analysed by either the opposition. In Scotland's case, where's the Scottish Labour Party? And in the Westminster case, where is Keir Starmer? Or by the so-called Fourth Estate, the journalists and broadcasters have performed, if anything, even more miserably than the politicians that they are supposed to be holding to account. Thanks, Craig. I couldn't have put it more eloquently than you. I won't try. Guy is in Stoke-on-Trent. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, good evening, George. George, New Zealand, I've got family in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, they'd had 9 fatalities. Now, I can't be any more accurate. My IT system's all gone down, but 48 hours ago, they'd lost 9 lives. For the last 3 weeks, every person flying into New Zealand is compulsory taken into quarantine for 14 nights. There's no debate. You are taken into quarantine. The government there have commandeered hotels and suitable accommodation, and they're put in there, and they're kept there, and they're monitored. Their PM, Jacinda, I think that's how you pronounce it, is proving highly popular.
She's done very well, hasn't she?
The feedback we get is that yeah, she's tough, but they like her. And also another thing she's done is she's cut all the government salaries by 20%.
Including her own, yeah.
Including her own, yeah. And can I just say, the country we ought to be looking at and trying to analyse is the German response. Now, they've got a population of 83 million.
Yeah, so more people than us, a European country like us. Same kind of population densities as us.
Yeah, but they've lost 25% of the fatalities which we've lost. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I would have thought the 2 main factors are, one, that they can test in the region of 500,000 people per week, and 2, they are resourced in the rate of 5 times greater than we are per capita. So for every 1 ventilator we've got, they've got 5, and that's not over the country, that's per 100,000 people.
Remarkable, remarkable, Guy. Thanks for that great call. The hour is running, though. Rashid is in California. Let's hear from him. Rashid, welcome.
Thank you, George. And just following up with what other commentators have said about the similarities between the recently leaked report about the Labour Party's machinations by unelected members of the Labour Party basically intending to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, and what we've seen in the United States, where not only 2016, but now 2020, people within the Democratic Party went out of their way to derail Bernie Sanders' efforts. What we see here is really actually very good news for people on both sides of the Atlantic, because these elements are finally being exposed, rather than being whispered by people in rumor and strange discussions. It's now in the open, just as the Chilcot report once and for all showed that Tony Blair was deceitful, possibly, and could be described by some people as a warmonger. Now we have evidence that people within the parties that we put all our energy and all our thoughts and prayers with are simply being derailed by individuals who have different agendas. And we understand that that's not just limited to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Dems. Wherever you go in the Western world and you have political parties, these problems appear over and over again. And it's about time we had the courage, since I'm in Long Beach, so close to Mexico, that we have the cojones to finally cross that line and address these questions in a civil, honest and open manner where we all can get to a better, more respectable place.
Fantastic call. Fantastic call. Stay safe in California, Rashid. Thank you. Here is Yvonne in Austria. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Hi, George. Hello. How are you?
Nice to hear from you again. I love that accent, that Austrian accent.
Well, I listened to that. I wanted to read to you something now. I've after losing the whole, actually the top of the leak here. It's from WikiLeaks, and it's I've lost the top of it to tell you what exactly. It was a conference that went on in France, and it's messages that have been cables. It's from the cables that have been written to the various countries that were taking part in this conference. It's about the biowarfare. And there's a message in here to the French to say, the U.S. believes participants would benefit from hearing about your experience assisting China in setting up a biosafety level 4 BSL-4 laboratory at the Wuhan Institute for Virology from the export control and tangible technology transfer perspectives. And so it's an email from the U.S. giving France a talking point to tell the people at this bio discussion, to tell them about how they helped set up the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Yeah, it's a joint operation. And they're not going to be able to wash their hands on that. When China finally answers these insults and slanders, they're not going to be able to avoid that. Interesting, Yvonne. Thanks for that. One last call from Jerry in Crystal Palace. Just because he's in Crystal Palace, I couldn't resist it. Go ahead, Jerry.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, hi there. How are you?
I'm good. You're on the air, sir.
Okay, thank you. Just a brief, quick question. I would like to know your opinion on the Brexit situation. How do you make a business and trade agreement with the world in this situation?
Well, we've already Brexited. We'll be leaving, I think, at the end of the year, either with a deal with the European Union, which even more desperately needs a deal than we do, given the current state of things both here and there. We must leave. We voted to leave. Parliament has passed a deal that we leave, and so we must, don't you think, Jerry?
Of course, but once we've reached the December deadline and we've actually officially left, where do you go from there on trade negotiations when everyone's shut down and things are going to be slow to take up again?
Yeah. Well, I'm in favour of a deal, but if we don't get one, I'm in favour of trading with everybody on World Trade Organization terms. I always have been. But if we don't get a deal, we ain't paying the divorce payment. You can't be denied a divorce and still be expected to pay. You can't be in the situation where they expect us to fork out £40 billion when we badly need that money here to rebuild our country, rebuild our economy once we have left. Unfortunately, Jerry, the hour has defeated us and can talk no longer. It's been marvellous for me. Next week, we're going to deal with the ragged-trousered philanthropist, so make sure you've read it. By next Sunday, we'll have an expert on and we'll have a proper discussion about it. Come back next week, same time, same place.